everyone, welcome to your guided reading lesson. This week we're going to be spending our lessons looking at the next chapter, which is called The Land Where the Sun Goes at Night. It's quite a long chapter, so I've broken it down into 3 parts. Part for Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and Thursday we're going to be looking at the chapter as a whole. Before we start our reading today, there was a bit of vocabulary I wanted to go over with you. So the first word is the word game. So we all know what a game is and we love playing them. Game can also refer to animals, normally animals that are hunted. So animals such as deer, moose, also smaller animals like rabbit. The next word is plateau, and a plateau means something flattens out. So it might be some land and then they reach a flat part. The next word is sew, which is a homophone because we know conjunction sew, sewing with a needle and thread. And sow can also mean planting seeds. Another word that goes alongside that is the word reap, and reap means to harvest or gather crops and plants once they finish growing. The next word is crescent, and crescent is often used to describe a moon when it's this sort of shape in the sky. The next word is belching, which is another word for burping. And the last word is the word ceased, and that means something has stopped. So it was happening and now it's ended and it's finished. So I wanted to go over those before we start reading because those will come up in our reading today. Okay, so we're starting from page 154, The Land Where the Sun Goes at Night. When Erik and his men landed on that green shore, they looked around in wonder. What if this were the land we have been seeking all this while, they whispered one to the other. It is indeed a fair country, murmured Ragnar Forkbeard. See how green the grass is. There is wild game in the forests, reported a search party. There are sheep and cattle in the meadows, reported another. And fruit and water and trees for timber, everything men could need, reported yet another. I have heard my father tell, many a time and oft, murmured Erik, that the land where the sun goes at night is such a place as this. Can it be that we are truly there at last? Asked Ragnar Forkbeard. But even as he spoke, they heard shouting and running feet, and they looked up and saw Sven the Strong running down the hillside towards the beach. Get your arms, he cried. What is it? Asked Erik, but Sven the Strong shook his head. Even if I were to tell you what I have found, you would not believe me, he said. Come and see for yourselves, but bring every weapon you have, for you will need them. And so they armed themselves and went with Sven the Strong back up the hill. They walked on for some time, wondering what it could be, but no matter how many times they asked Sven what it was, he shook his head and refused to answer at all. After some while, they reached a high plateau and found themselves looking down into a fertile plain. There were fields and meadows, sheep on the hills, a village in the distance, and through it all ran a broad river sparkling in the sun. Look over there, whispered Sven the Strong, and as Erik and the others watched, they saw a strange, hunched figure go into a field and start to sow corn. I can only see a farmer sowing corn, said Erik. He has a hunched back, but there is nothing so extraordinary about that. Watch, whispered Sven the Strong. And as he spoke, the hunchbacked farmer finished sowing the field, and the moment the last seed was sown, a most extraordinary thing happened. As Erik and his comrades watched, green shoots began to thrust out from the earth, and the corn began to grow, and before even a word of surprise could come to their lips, the field was full of ripe corn, and the hunchbacked farmer had begun to reap it. Now I truly believe we have found what we sought, said Erik, for I have heard my father many a time describe such a place as this, as the land where the sun goes at night, a land so fertile that no one need ever go hungry again. But no sooner had he said these words than there was a roar, and Erik and his men turned to see a terrible creature glaring down at them. It was as tall as an oak tree, and its head was in the middle of its chest. Before they had time to raise their bows, the creature gave another roar, and as it opened its mouth, they could see its teeth had been filed to sharp points. Now I see why we have brought our weapons, cried Ragnar Forkbeard, and he raised his bow just as the creature took another step towards them, and it stretched out its arm so that its clenched fist hung above them, blotting out the sun. Our swords and arrows will be but pins and penknives against such a creature, cried Thorkild, but Sven the Strong had already let fly an arrow, and it flew straight and true and pierced the terrible creature in the left eye. Whereupon the creature roared in pain, fell to its knees, and its fist came crashing down amongst the companions like the bow of some mighty oak. The two of them were crushed under its weight and screamed out in agony. Then Thorkild let fly his arrow, and it flew straight and true and pierced the monster in the right eye. And again the monster roared out in pain and toppled forwards and smashed down like some great tree, and the ground shook As it fell, the companions ran for their lives, and the fist that it had held above them opened, and out rolled a huge piece of gold shaped like the crescent moon. "This is more wonderful than ever," murmured Eric, and was about to rush forward to seize the precious metal when he stopped and looked down upon the plain below them. There he saw more misshapen creatures running towards the plateau where they stood. "Quick!" shouted Eric, above the roaring of the wounded monster. "We must return to Golden Dragon as fast as ever we can, for we will soon be outnumbered." Then Ragnar Forkbeard seized the golden moon, though it was all he could do to lift it up, and they all turned to retrace their steps. But even as they turned, the blood froze in their veins, for there, standing in the path by which they had come, were 20, 30, maybe 50 of the creatures, each as tall and as misshapen as the first, and each began to roar and began to stride towards Eric and his men. "Follow me!" cried Eric, and without another word they began scrambling and running up the mountain. Up they climbed, up, and behind them they heard the monstrous beings roaring for their wounded comrade. But still Eric and his men climbed until, just as the sun was setting, they stopped and, looking down, they saw the monsters turning and going back down the mountainside. "They have gone to gather more of their kind," said Eric. "What are we to do?" his men began to whisper to each other. "We have found at last the land where the sun goes at night, and yet here we are trapped on this mountainside, cut off from our ship, without food or drink, while this monstrous enemy surrounds us and gathers its forces to finish us off once and for all." "It is indeed hard to be near and yet so far," murmured Thorkild. But just then a strange and even more wonderful thing began to happen. The mountainside began to tremble and began belching out smoke, so that Eric and his men were forced back down the rock face for some way. They stood there dumbfounded and trembling with fear, as the very earth shook and the smoke billowed out and formed a black cloud that hung over the mountain. Then there was a terrible crack, and the summit of the mountain split apart, and a sheet of flame shot out into the air. "We are doomed!" cried Eric's men. "There are monsters below us and a volcano above. This surely is the end." But there was one among them who was not white with fear and who did not tremble. Thorkild was standing, wide-eyed in wonder, staring into the sheet of flame at the top of the mountain. "What is it, Thorkild?" cried Eric. "What do you see?" "I see something I never thought to see again," replied Thorkild, and he began to walk towards the flames that lit up the gathering night. "Come back!" cried Ragnar Forkbeard. "What are you doing?" cried Sven the Strong. But Thorkild was climbing up as if in a trance, and as he did so the black cloud descended upon him and he vanished from their sight. As soon as he was gone, the mountain ceased shaking, and the noise of thunder that had filled their ears abated. Eric's men looked at one another, and each one wondered what it was that Thorkild had seen. And we'll find out what that is tomorrow. So enjoy your questions and your tasks, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.